The Senate hearing room buzzed with tension as Vice President Kamala Harris sat at the head of the committee table, her burgundy blazer sharp under the bright lights. The topic was critical: voting rights protections that Republicans were trying to dismantle. Across the room, Republican senators smirked, armed with talking points designed to derail the conversation. Then it happened. A Republican senator from Texas launched a pointed attack, claiming the Democrats were exaggerating voter suppression and that certain communities simply didn't care enough to vote. The room gasped. The implication was clear, and it was ugly. Kamala Harris's jaw tightened. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the freshman representative from Texas who had made waves for her fearless questioning and razor-sharp legal mind. Crockett sat forward in her chair, hand already half raised, fire in her eyes. "Congresswoman Crockett," Harris said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "would you like to respond to that statement?" The room fell silent. Every camera turned toward Jasmine Crockett. This was the moment that would change everything. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss moments like these when truth meets power head-on. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to know who Jasmine Crockett is and why Republicans underestimated her so badly. Jasmine Crockett wasn't your typical freshman congresswoman. At 42 years old, she had already built a reputation as a civil rights attorney who didn't back down from anyone. She grew up in St. Louis, went to law school, and spent years fighting voter suppression cases in Texas courts before deciding to run for Congress herself in 2022. She won her seat in Texas's 30th district with a clear mission: protect voting rights, fight for working families, and never let lies go unchallenged. Her first year in Congress had been explosive. She'd gone viral multiple times for her questioning during committee hearings, breaking down complex legal arguments into simple truths that anyone could understand. But she'd also made enemies, powerful ones. Republicans saw her as a threat. She was young, black, brilliant, and unafraid to call out hypocrisy. Conservative media had tried to dismiss her as just another progressive radical, but their attacks only made her more popular with her base. On the other side of this confrontation sat Senator James Mitchell from Texas, a 6'8" Republican who'd held his seat for 24 years. He was old school, connected, and had never been seriously challenged. He believed his seniority gave him the right to say whatever he wanted without consequences. Mitchell had just made a catastrophic mistake. His comment about certain communities not caring enough to vote wasn't just offensive, it was factually wrong and historically ignorant. It echoed decades of racist voter suppression rhetoric that claimed black and brown communities were apathetic rather than systematically blocked from the polls. Vice President Kamala Harris knew exactly what she was doing when she called on Crockett. Harris herself had faced similar dismissive comments throughout her career. She'd been underestimated, talked over, and had her intelligence questioned. Now, as the first woman, first black woman, and first South Asian woman to serve as vice president, she wasn't about to let Mitchell's comment slide. The stakes were enormous. This wasn't just about one senator's ignorant remark, it was about the broader fight over voting rights that was happening across America. Republican-led states had passed dozens of laws, making it harder to vote, reducing early voting periods, eliminating drop boxes, purging voter rolls, and creating new ID requirements that disproportionately affected communities of color. Democrats had been trying to pass federal voting rights legislation for years, but they kept hitting walls. Republicans claimed there was no voter suppression problem, that Democrats were inventing a crisis. And now, on national television, with C-SPAN cameras rolling and social media ready to explode, Senator Mitchell had just given Jasmine Crockett the perfect opening to prove him catastrophically wrong. Crockett stood slowly, adjusting her microphone. She wore a navy suit that meant business, her hair pulled back, her expression calm but intense. She'd been preparing for this moment her entire career. "Thank you, Madam Vice President," she began, her voice steady and clear. Senator Mitchell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a slight smirk on his face. He thought this would be easy. He thought he could talk over her, dismiss her, maybe throw in a condescending young lady if needed. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Jasmine Crockett didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Senator Mitchell, you just said that certain communities don't care enough to vote. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Are you suggesting that black and Latino voters are apathetic about voting?" Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't say black or Latino specifically, Congresswoman. I said certain communities." "Let's not play games with language, Senator," Crockett interrupted, her tone sharp but professional. We all know what certain communities means. It's the same coded language politicians have used for decades when they don't want to say what they really mean. A few Democrats on the committee nodded. Republicans looked annoyed. Vice President Harris remained perfectly still, watching. Mitchell tried to recover. Congresswoman, I think you're being overly sensitive. All I'm saying is that voter turnout in some areas is lower than others, and maybe that's because people aren't motivated. Motivated? Crockett's eyebrows shot up. Senator, let me tell you about motivation. Let me tell you about my grandmother. The room shifted. Personal stories in congressional hearings could go either way. They could be powerful or fall flat. But something in Crockett's voice suggested this wasn't going to be a typical anecdote. My grandmother was born in 1942 inches, Mississippi. She was 23 years old when the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. Before that, she couldn't vote because of poll taxes, literacy tests, and the very real threat of violence. When she finally could vote, she walked 3 miles to her polling place because she didn't have a car and there was no public transportation in her area. Crockett's voice gained momentum, but she wasn't yelling. She was building a case. She stood in line for 4 hours. 4 hours, Senator. And she did that every single election for the next 50 years until she passed away in 2015. So when you tell me that certain communities don't care enough to vote, you're not just wrong, you're insulting the memory of people like my grandmother who fought for that right. Applause broke out from the audience section. Harris gently tapped her gavel. Order, please. But Crockett wasn't done. And Senator, since we're talking about motivation and turnout, let's talk about what's really happening in your state of Texas. Should we? Mitchell's smirk disappeared. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Crockett pulled out a folder and opened it with deliberate precision. In 2021, Texas passed SB 1, which your office supported. That law eliminated 24-hour voting sites. It eliminated drive-through voting. It gave partisan poll watchers more power to intimidate voters. It made it a crime for election officials to send out mail-in ballot applications to voters who didn't request them. She looked up from her papers, directly at Mitchell. And do you know which communities were most affected by those changes, Senator? Let me guess, certain communities? Laughter rippled through the room, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of laughter that happens when someone gets caught in their own trap. Mitchell's face reddened. Those laws were about election security. Election security from what? Crockett shot back. Your own state officials, Republicans, said the 2020 election in Texas was secure. There was no widespread fraud. So what exactly were you securing against? We were preventing future problems. No, Senator, you were creating current problems. Let me give you some specific examples. This was where Crockett shifted from emotional appeal to devastating factual assault. In Harris County, which includes Houston, where 43% of the population is Latino and 20% is Black, SB 1 forced the closure of multiple 24-hour voting locations that were specifically set up to help working people vote outside. Traditional hours, night shift workers, single parents, people working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. She flipped a page. In 2020, before your law, Harris County had 127 early voting locations. After SB 1, that number dropped to 38. That's a 70% reduction, Senator. And somehow, mysteriously, most of those closures happened in communities of color, Mitchell tried to interrupt. The county made those decisions, based on restrictions your law imposed. Crockett's voice rose for the first time, then immediately came back down. She was in complete control. You tied their hands and then blamed them for the outcome. That's not election security. That's voter suppression with plausible deniability. Republican senators began whispering among themselves. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. They'd expected Democrats to give emotional speeches about voting rights. They hadn't expected a lawyer with receipts. Senator Rebecca Coleman from Ohio, a Republican, tried to help Mitchell. Congresswoman Crockett, with all due respect, I think you're cherry-picking data. Am I? Crockett turned her attention to Coleman without missing a beat. Then let's talk about Ohio. Coleman's face went pale. Ohio purged 1.2 million voters from its rolls between 2020 and 2023. Your office supported that purge, didn't you, Senator Coleman? Those were inactive voters. Some were inactive because they'd moved or passed away, yes. But thousands were purged simply for not voting in recent elections. So let me get this straight. Your solution to people not voting is to make it even harder for them to vote by removing them from the rolls entirely. The logic trap was perfect. Coleman had no good answer. Vice President Harris leaned forward slightly, a hint of a smile on her face. She'd seen brilliant courtroom work before, but this was exceptional. Crockett continued, sensing she had the room. And let's talk about Georgia. After the 2020 election, Georgia passed SB 202, which criminalized giving water to people standing in long voting lines. Water. We're talking about giving someone a bottle of water on a hot Georgia day while they wait sometimes for 6 or 7 hours to exercise their constitutional right. She paused for effect. Why would people wait 6 or 7 hours to vote, senators? Is it because they don't care enough? Or is it because precincts in predominantly black neighborhoods have been systematically underfunded, understaffed, and equipped with fewer voting machines than precincts in white neighborhoods? Senator Mitchell finally found his voice again. Congresswoman, you're painting a very biased picture. Biased? Crockett's eyes flashed. Senator, I'm citing your own state's data. I'm referencing laws you voted for. The only bias here is against voters who don't look like you. The room erupted. Republicans called for order. Democrats applauded. Harris had to use her gavel multiple times. But in that chaos, Crockett remained perfectly calm, standing at her microphone, waiting for silence to return. When it did, she delivered the next blow. Senator Mitchell, you said certain communities don't care enough to vote. Let me tell you what those communities actually care about. This was the moment. Jasmine Crockett had spent the last several minutes methodically dismantling Republican talking points with facts and data. She'd exposed the hypocrisy of voter suppression laws disguised as election security. She'd made senators squirm with their own voting records. Now she was going for the knockout. In the 2022 midterms, Crockett began, her voice strong and clear. Black voter turnout in Georgia was the highest it's ever been. This happened after Republicans passed their restrictive voting law. Black voters waited in those long lines. They brought their own water. They organized carpools to get to polling places that had been moved farther away. They voted early because they knew Republicans were trying to make Election Day harder. She looked directly at Mitchell. So please don't tell me black communities don't care. We care so much that we'll overcome every obstacle you put in our way. The question is, why do you keep putting obstacles in our way? Mitchell opened his mouth, but no words came out. He genuinely had no response. Crockett pressed forward. And let me address the real issue here, because I think we've been dancing around it long enough. This isn't about election security. This has never been about election security. This is about power. She turned to face the entire committee, not just Mitchell. When Democrats win elections, Republicans don't ask, what did we do wrong? How can we appeal to more voters? No. Instead, you ask, how can we make it harder for those voters to vote next time? And you package it as election integrity. Republican senators began objecting, but Crockett raised her hand. Let me finish, please. I have evidence. She pulled out another document. This is a leaked memo from a Republican consulting firm in 2019. It was obtained through a Freedom of Information request by a watchdog group. Would you like to know what it says? The room went dead silent. Even the Republican senators wanted to know. Crockett read directly from the document. Reducing early voting periods and eliminating Sunday voting options will disproportionately impact the Democratic base, particularly black voters who utilize souls to the polls church voting drives. This could reduce Democratic turnout by 7–11% in key precincts. She looked up. This isn't a conspiracy theory, senators. This is your strategy document. You're not trying to secure elections. You're trying to win them by preventing your opponent's voters from casting ballots. The room exploded again. Democrats demanded to know which consulting firm wrote the memo. Republicans claimed it was taken out of context. Reporters in the press gallery frantically typed on their phones. Vice President Harris let the chaos continue for a moment before calling for order. Congresswoman Crockett, can you provide the committee with a copy of that document? Harris asked. Already prepared, Madam Vice President. Crockett held up a stack of folders. I have copies for every member of this committee, as well as for the press. Senator Mitchell looked like he'd been punched in the gut. This was worse than he'd imagined. This wasn't just a speech, it was an evidentiary hearing, and he was losing badly. But Crockett had one more move. Senator Mitchell, earlier you said that voter suppression is exaggerated. You said that if people really wanted to vote, they would find a way. So let me ask you a direct question. She locked eyes with him. In your district in Texas, the wealthiest precinct, which is 89% white, has a polling place for every 1,200 residents. The poorest precinct, which is 73% black and Latino, has one polling place for every 4,800 residents. Why is that? Mitchell stammered. I'm not responsible for how counties allocate resources. But you voted for the laws that forced those allocations. You voted to reduce the number of polling places. You voted to cut early voting. Those decisions didn't affect your wealthy white constituents. They affected my people. The my people hit hard. Crockett wasn't hiding behind neutral language anymore. She was owning her identity and using it as moral authority. And here's the thing, Senator. I can prove it wasn't an accident. She pulled out her final piece of evidence. This is a map of Texas showing polling place closures between 2013, when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and 2023. The red areas are predominantly white. The blue areas are predominantly black and Latino. She held up the map so the cameras could see it clearly. Notice anything? Almost all the closures are in blue areas. In fact, 750 polling places closed in communities of color, while predominantly white areas saw almost no closures. Some actually gained polling places. She set the map down gently. So when you say certain, communities don't care enough to vote, what you really mean is, we've made it so hard for certain communities to vote that we hope they'll give up. But we're not giving up, Senator. We never have, and we never will. The Democratic side of the committee rose in applause. Several Republicans looked genuinely uncomfortable. Senator Mitchell sat with his arms crossed, face red, staring at the table. Vice President Harris allowed the applause to continue for a moment before gaveling for order. "Congresswoman Crockett, do you have anything else to add?" Harris asked, and there was warmth in her voice now. This was a vice president who had walked similar paths, faced similar dismissals, and recognized excellence when she saw it. Crockett smiled slightly. "Just one more thing, Madam Vice President." She turned back to Mitchell one final time. "Senator, you've been in office for 24 years. In that time, you voted against the Voting Rights Act restoration 3 times. You voted to reduce polling places twice. You've supported strict voter ID laws that disproportionately affect elderly and poor voters. And today, you had the audacity to claim that the problem is voter apathy." She paused. "The problem isn't apathy, Senator. The problem is you. And the good news is problems can be solved. In 2024, voters in Texas are going to solve you right out of office." The room erupted one more time, but this time, Harris didn't call for order immediately. She let the moment breathe. She let Jasmine Crockett's words hang in the air. Senator Mitchell stood abruptly and walked out of the hearing room, refusing to respond. His absence spoke louder than any rebuttal could have. As he left, Crockett remained standing at her microphone, calm and composed, the eye of the storm she'd just created. The moment Jasmine Crockett finished her response, the political world exploded. Within 5 minutes, number Crockett shutdown was trending on Twitter, X. Within 10 minutes, it was the number 1 trend nationwide. Within an hour, it was trending globally. The video clip, particularly the moment when Crockett revealed the leaked Republican memo, spread like wildfire across social media. TikTok users created reaction videos. Instagram influencers shared the moment with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." YouTube channels posted the full exchange with thumbnails showing Crockett's fierce expression and Mitchell's deflated posture. Conservative media immediately went into damage control mode. Fox News tried to spin it as Democrats playing the race card again, but even their own commentators seemed half-hearted. One Fox analyst admitted, "Look, she came with receipts. Those documents are real. That map doesn't lie." Newsmax ran segments claiming the leaked memo was out of context, but they couldn't explain what context would make it acceptable. Right-wing Twitter accounts attacked Crockett personally, calling her aggressive, divisive, and race-baiting, the typical descriptors used against black women who dare to speak forcefully. But these attacks backfired spectacularly. Thousands of users, including many white allies, called out the racist and sexist undertones. One viral tweet read, "When a white man speaks passionately, he's strong. When a black woman presents evidence and demands accountability, she's aggressive." Funny how that works. Meanwhile, progressive media celebrated Crockett as a hero. MSNBC ran multiple segments analyzing her performance. Legal experts praised her methodology, presenting personal narrative, then data, then documentary evidence, then direct confrontation. It was like watching a masterclass in persuasive argumentation, said one constitutional law professor. The Young Turks dedicated an entire show to the moment, with host Cenk Uygur declaring, "This is why we need more people like Jasmine Crockett in Congress." She doesn't just talk about fighting for voting rights, she actually fights. Pod Save America featured Crockett on their podcast within 48 hours, where she explained her strategy. "I knew Mitchell was going to be dismissive. I knew he'd try to talk over me. so I came with so much evidence that he couldn't. I made it impossible for him to deny what was happening. The mainstream media couldn't ignore the story. The New York Times ran a front-page analysis. In Viral Hearing Moment, Rep. Crockett exposes GOP voting strategy. The piece detailed the leaked memo and mapped out the polling place closures Crockett had referenced, confirming all her data. The Washington Post published an op-ed titled, "Jasmine Crockett Just Changed the Voting Rights Debate," arguing that her fact-based approach made it impossible for Republicans to hide behind election integrity rhetoric anymore. CNN ran the clip dozens of times, with Jake Tapper calling it one of the most effective takedowns I've seen in a congressional hearing in years. But the impact went beyond media coverage. Within 2 days, 3 major voting rights organizations reported massive spikes in donations. People who'd never been politically active were signing up to volunteer for voter registration drives. Democratic fundraising emails featuring Crockett's image were seeing open rates 40% higher than normal. The leaked memo Crockett referenced became a major story on its own. Investigative journalists tracked down the consulting firm that wrote it, a group called Strategic Electoral Consulting, which had worked with Republican campaigns in 7 states. The firm's website went dark within hours of the hearing. But reporters found archived versions of their client list, which included Senator Mitchell's campaign, Senator Coleman's campaign, and the campaigns of 14 other Republican senators and governors. Each of those politicians was now being asked by local reporters, "Did you use this firm? Did you know about their voter suppression strategies?" Several Republicans tried to distance themselves, claiming they'd hired the firm for general consulting, not specifically for voter suppression tactics. But that defense rang hollow when reporters obtained contracts showing the firm had been specifically tasked with demographic turnout analysis and strategic precinct management consulting speak for figuring out how to reduce minority turnout. Senator Mitchell's political career went into freefall. Texas newspapers that had previously supported him published editorials calling for his resignation. The Dallas Morning News wrote, "Senator Mitchell's comments and his exposed strategy represent everything wrong with modern politics. He doesn't deserve another term." Polling showed his approval rating dropping 18 points in 1 week. Even among Texas Republicans, his support fell to 52%, a disaster for an incumbent in a solid red state. Democratic challengers immediately announced primary runs against him. One, a former Marine and voting rights attorney, released an announcement video that opened with Crockett's "The problem is you" quote. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Vice President Kamala Harris. Harris had taken criticism throughout her vice presidency for being invisible or not forceful enough. But her decision to call on Crockett at that precise moment showed political instincts that reminded people why she'd been a formidable prosecutor and senator. A profile in Politico noted, "Harris knew exactly what she was doing when she gave Crockett the floor. She knew Crockett was prepared, she knew Mitchell was vulnerable, and she let a rising star shine while simultaneously striking a blow for voting rights." That's strategic leadership. The moment also boosted Harris's standing with the progressive base, which had sometimes criticized her as too moderate. By empowering Crockett, a progressive champion, Harris built bridges within her own party. As for Jasmine Crockett herself, she became an instant political superstar. Her congressional office was flooded with media requests. She appeared on The View, The Daily Show, Real Time with Bill Maher, and dozens of other programs. Each appearance showcased her sharp wit, deep knowledge, and ability to communicate complex issues in accessible terms. Democratic leadership took notice. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries appointed her to the influential Judiciary Committee, a rare move for a freshman representative. Nancy Pelosi publicly praised her as the future of the Democratic Party. Fundraising for her re-election campaign exploded. She raised $2.3 million in 1 week, more than most House members raise in an entire cycle. Small dollar donations averaged $27, showing grassroots enthusiasm. Progressive groups began talking about her as a potential future Speaker of the House, or even a presidential candidate someday. She's 42 now, one Democratic strategist told Axios. In 20 years, she could be leading this country. But Crockett herself kept focused on the work. In an interview with NPR, she said, "I didn't go viral because I wanted attention. I went viral because I told the truth. And the truth is that Republicans are making it harder for people to vote, particularly black and brown people. That's not an opinion, it's documented fact. My job is to keep documenting it and keep fighting it." She introduced the Voting Access Protection Act, comprehensive legislation that would reverse many of the restrictions Republicans had passed at state levels. The bill included provisions to establish minimum standards for polling place density based on population, 10N, require early voting periods of at least 15 days, 10N, mandate that no voter should wait more than 30 minutes to vote, criminalize part intentional voter intimidation, 9, restore the full Voting Rights Act protections. The bill had no chance of passing with a Republican-controlled House, but it served as a marker, a statement of values that Democrats could campaign on. And campaign on it, they did. In the 2024 elections, Democratic candidates across the country used footage of Crockett's hearing moment in their ads. A Senate candidate in Arizona ran a spot that showed Crockett saying, "The problem is you," before cutting to footage of her Republican opponent voting to restrict voting access. The strategy worked. Democrats flipped 3 Senate seats and gained 12 House seats, several in districts that Republicans had thought were safe. Exit polls showed that voting rights was a top 3 issue for Democratic voters. And voters under 3-5, the group most engaged on social media, turned out at historic levels. Political analysts credited multiple factors for the Democratic gains, but many pointed to moments like Crockett's hearing testimony as crystallizing what the election was about. "She made it simple," said one pollster. "Republicans were making it harder to vote. Democrats were fighting to protect that right. When you frame it that clearly, with evidence, voters respond." 6 months after the hearing, Senator James Mitchell announced he would not seek re-election. He claimed he wanted to spend more time with family, but everyone knew the truth. Jasmine Crockett had ended his political career. In his retirement announcement, he didn't mention Crockett by name, but he didn't have to. Everyone remembered the moment when a 42-year-old freshman congresswoman systematically dismantled a 24-year Senate veteran with nothing but facts, passion, and preparation. As for the leaked memo that Crockett had revealed the smoking gun that proved Republican voter suppression was intentional, it became Exhibit A in multiple lawsuits challenging state voting laws. Civil rights groups in Georgia, Texas, Arizona, and North Carolina all cited the document in their cases, arguing that it proved discriminatory intent. Federal judges in 2 states ruled that the memo did indeed demonstrate that voting restrictions were passed with the purpose of reducing minority turnout, violating the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. Those rulings forced the states to restore earlier voting rules and reopen polling places. One constitutional law scholar wrote, "A single congressional hearing moment led to actual policy changes in multiple states." That's extraordinarily rare and speaks to both the power of Crockett's presentation and the weakness of the Republican position. The moment also sparked a broader conversation about who gets to speak in Congress and how they're treated when they do. Black Women in Congress, a group that includes Crockett, Ayanna Pressley, Cori Bush, Summer Lee, and others, published a joint op-ed in Essence magazine titled, "We Will Not Be Silenced." The piece read in part, "For too long, Black women in politics have been told we're too angry, too aggressive, or too divisive when we speak with passion and demand accountability. But we're done apologizing for our strength." When Jasmine Crockett stood up in that hearing, she wasn't being divisive, she was telling the truth. And if the truth divides those who support democracy from those who undermine it, then so be it. The op-ed was shared millions of times and sparked discussions in newsrooms, corporate boardrooms, and living rooms across America about the double standards applied to Black women in leadership. A year after the hearing, Vogue magazine put Crockett on its cover with the headline, "The Congresswoman Who Changed Everything." The accompanying profile detailed her journey from civil rights attorney to national political figure. In the interview, Crockett reflected on that viral moment. "People ask me if I was nervous. Honestly, no, I was prepared. I'd been fighting voter suppression my entire career. I knew the facts inside and out. So when Vice President Harris called on me, I was ready." She continued, "But here's what people don't realize, that moment wasn't about me destroying Senator Mitchell. It was about giving voice to millions of people whose voting rights are under attack. My grandmother, who walked 3 miles to vote. My clients in Texas, who had to wait 7 hours in line. The students who couldn't vote because their college ID wasn't accepted. I was speaking for them." The profile also revealed that Crockett had received death threats after the hearing, and a detail she'd kept private to avoid giving her attackers attention. "It comes with the territory," she said. "When you challenge power, power fights back, but I'm not scared of them. They should be scared of us, of the voters they're trying to silence." That fighting spirit made Crockett a sought-after campaigner. In the 2024 cycle, she campaigned in 23 states for Democratic candidates, with a particular focus on voter protection initiatives. Wherever she went, crowds came out often in the thousands to hear her speak. Her stump speech always included a version of what she'd said in the hearing. "They say we don't care about voting. We say we care. So much we'll overcome every obstacle they put in our way. And in November, we're going to overcome them." The speech worked. In districts where Crockett campaigned, Democratic turnout increased an average of 8.3% compared to previous elections. Looking back now, that moment in the Senate hearing room represents something larger than one viral video or one political victory. It represents the power of preparation meeting opportunity. Crockett didn't accidentally become a star, she earned it through years of work, study, and frontline advocacy. It represents the importance of authenticity in politics. Voters responded to Crockett because she wasn't reading from a script or testing messages with focus groups. She was speaking from experience and conviction. It represents generational change in American politics. The old guard, represented by Senator Mitchell, tried to dismiss and belittle a younger leader. That strategy failed because Crockett came armed with something more powerful than seniority, facts, passion, and the moral authority of fighting for what's right. And most importantly, it represents the ongoing battle for voting rights in America, a battle that's been fought for generations and continues today. Every time someone waits in a long line to vote, they're honoring the activists who fought for that right. Every time someone fills out their ballot despite new ID requirements or reduced polling places, they're refusing to be suppressed. Every time someone like Jasmine Crockett stands up and demands accountability, they're continuing a tradition of resistance that stretches back centuries. The hearing ended with Vice President Harris thanking all the witnesses and adjourning the session. But as Crockett gathered her papers and walked out of the room, she was stopped by a young black woman, maybe 20 years old, who'd been watching from the gallery. "Thank you," the young woman said, tears in her eyes. "My mom couldn't be here, but she wanted me to tell you. She stood in line for 6 hours to vote in Georgia in 2020. She almost gave up, but she kept thinking about her grandmother who couldn't vote at all. When she saw you today, she called me crying. She said someone finally said what she's been feeling." Crockett hugged the young woman. No cameras caught it, no one tweeted about it. But in that moment, the real impact of what had happened became clear. This wasn't about going viral or embarrassing a senator or even winning elections, though all those things mattered. It was about validation. About seeing yourself represented. About knowing that someone in power understands your struggle and is willing to fight for you. That's the legacy of the moment when Kamala Harris called on Jasmine Crockett, and Crockett shut down the entire hearing. Not just the viral video, but the message it sent. "We see you, we hear you, we're with you. And we're not backing down." If this story inspired you, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We're covering the political moments that matter, the leaders who are fighting for change, and the truth that powerful people don't want you to hear. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about Jasmine Crockett's response, and let us know what political moments you want us to cover next. Together, we're building a community that demands accountability from our leaders. Don't miss out, subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next video where we break down the latest political showdowns that are shaping our democracy. And Senator Mitchell wasn't done trying to defend himself. After a brief recess, he returned to his seat with a stack of papers, clearly prepared by his staff during the break. He thought he'd found his way out. "Congresswoman Crockett," Mitchell began, his voice trying to regain authority, "I appreciate your passion, but I think you're confusing correlation with causation. Just because polling places closed in certain areas doesn't mean there was intentional discrimination. Counties make these decisions based on budget constraints." "Budget constraints?" Crockett interrupted, leaning forward. "Senator, let's talk about budgets then. Your state of Texas has a $33 billion surplus, billion with a B. Yet somehow, counties can't afford to keep polling places open in Black and Latino neighborhoods?" She pulled out yet another document. Crockett seemed to have an endless supply of evidence. "This is Texas's state budget from 2022. Your office supported cutting election administration funding by $25 million while simultaneously increasing funding for border security by $3 billion. So the money exists, you're just choosing not to spend it on making sure people can vote." Mitchell's face reddened again. "Border security is a federal issue, and voting rights are a constitutional right." Crockett's voice rose with controlled passion. "You're telling me you can find billions for political stunts at the border, but you can't find millions to ensure every Texan can vote without waiting 7 hours? That's not a budget problem, Senator. That's a priorities problem." Other senators began shifting uncomfortably. Even some Republicans were starting to realize how bad this looked. Senator Coleman from Ohio tried once more to help Mitchell. I think what Senator Mitchell is trying to say is that these are complex issues with multiple factors. No, Senator Coleman, they're really not that complex, Crockett shot back. Let me make it simple. Before the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, states with histories of discrimination had to get federal approval before changing voting rules. That was called pre-clearance. It worked. It protected voters. She paused, letting that sink in. After 2013, when that protection was removed, those same states immediately started closing polling places, purging voter rolls, and passing restrictive ID laws. Within 5 years, over 1,600 polling places were closed across the country. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. Vice President Harris nodded slightly, a small gesture of agreement that cameras caught. Crockett continued, "And here's what really gets me, senators. You all took an oath to uphold the Constitution. The 15th Amendment says the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race. The 19th Amendment extended that right to women. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes. The 26th Amendment gave 8-year-olds the right to vote." Her voice grew more powerful with each amendment she cited. Our Constitution has been amended 5 times to expand and protect voting rights. 5 times. That's how fundamental this right is to our democracy. And yet here we are in 2024, still fighting to protect it because some of you would rather win by suppression than by persuasion. The audience section erupted in applause again. This time, Harris didn't immediately gavel for order. She let Crockett's words resonate. Mitchell made one last, desperate attempt. "Congresswoman, I resent the implication that I'm racist. I didn't say you were racist, Senator." Crockett replied, her tone suddenly calm and measured, which somehow made her words even more devastating. "I said your policies have a racist impact. There's a difference. You might not wake up every morning thinking, how can I discriminate today? But when you support laws that you know will disproportionately harm Black and Latino voters, and you support them anyway, what else should we call that?" The room went silent. That distinction between racist intent and racist impact cut through every defense Mitchell had tried to mount. And honestly, Senator, your intent doesn't matter to the grandmother who has to stand in line for 6 hours. It doesn't matter to the student whose college ID isn't accepted. It doesn't matter to the worker who can't take time off on a Tuesday to vote because you eliminated weekend early voting. They experience the impact, regardless of your intent. Mitchell had no response. He simply sat there, defeated. Crockett took a breath and delivered her final blow of this section. "You asked earlier if I was being overly sensitive about your certain community's comment. Let me tell you what sensitivity is, Senator. Sensitivity is understanding that words matter. That when you use coded language, people hear what you really mean. That when you dismiss concerns about voter suppression, you're dismissing the lived experiences of millions of Americans." She looked around the room, making eye contact with various senators. "I'm not being sensitive. I'm being accurate. And if accuracy makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's something you need to examine within yourself." As Crockett wrapped up her presentation of evidence, something unexpected happened. Senator Maria Rodriguez from Nevada, a moderate Republican who had remained silent throughout the hearing, raised her hand. "Madam Vice President, may I say something?" Harris nodded, curious about where this would go. Rodriguez stood, and her voice was quiet but firm. "Congresswoman Crockett, I want to thank you for your testimony today, and I want to apologize." The room went dead silent. Republicans apologizing to Democrats during a heated hearing was virtually unheard of. "I represent Nevada, and we've had our own issues with polling place accessibility. I've been in the Senate for 6 years, and I've voted along party lines on election issues without really examining the impact of those votes." Rodriguez's voice wavered slightly. "My parents came to this country from Mexico in the 1972. My father became a citizen in 1985. I will never forget the day he voted for the first time. He wore a suit, the only suit he owned, because he said voting was sacred. He cried when he put his ballot in the box." She looked directly at Crockett. "What you said about your grandmother that could have been my father. And I've been voting to make it harder for people like him to exercise that right. I told myself it was about security, about fraud prevention. But you've shown us today that those were excuses, not reasons." Several other senators, both Democrats and Republicans, looked uncomfortable. Rodriguez was breaking an unspoken rule: never admit your side might be wrong during a hearing. But she continued anyway. "I can't undo my past votes, but I can commit to doing better. I'd like to co-sponsor your Voting Access Protection Act, Congresswoman Crockett." and I'd like to work with you to examine polling place allocations in Nevada and fix what's broken." The Democratic side of the room erupted in applause. Some Republicans applauded hesitantly. Others, including Mitchell, sat stone-faced. Crockett looked genuinely moved. "Senator Rodriguez, I would be honored to work with you. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about right versus wrong, and I believe we can find common ground when we put voters first." Vice President Harris smiled broadly. This was the kind of breakthrough moment that rarely happened in modern politics, someone actually changing their position based on evidence and moral argument. But not everyone was happy about this development. As the hearing concluded, conservative media immediately attacked Senator Rodriguez. Within hours, right-wing Twitter was calling her a rhino Republican in name only and demanding she be primaried. Fox News ran segments questioning her loyalty to the party. But Rodriguez stood firm. In an interview that evening with CNN, she said, "I didn't come to Washington to follow party orders blindly. I came to do what's right for my constituents. And making it easier for them to vote is right, regardless of which party it helps." The Rodriguez defection signaled something significant. Crockett's testimony had been so compelling, so thoroughly documented, that it created a permission structure for other Republicans to break ranks. Within a week, 2 more Republican senators, one from Arizona and one from North Carolina, announced they would support voting rights reforms. It wasn't enough to pass legislation immediately, but it was a crack in the wall. And cracks, as Crockett noted in a press conference, are where light gets in. 3 months after the hearing, something remarkable happened that showed the lasting impact of Crockett's testimony. A small town in rural Georgia called Pemberton had become a symbol of voter suppression. The town was 65% black, but its single polling place had been moved 3 times in 5 years, each time farther from the predominantly black neighborhoods. In 2022, average wait times to vote exceeded 4 hours. Local activists had been fighting this for years, but they'd been ignored by state officials and lacked the resources to mount a serious legal challenge. Then Jasmine Crockett visited Pemberton. She didn't come with media fanfare or a big entourage. She came with a small team of voting rights attorneys and spent 3 days in the town, documenting conditions, interviewing voters, and gathering evidence. One of the voters she met was 7-8-year-old Dorothy Washington, who had arthritis and could barely stand for more than 30 minutes. "I tried to vote in 2022, Mrs. Washington told Crockett, tears streaming down her face. "I stood in that line for 2 hours before my legs gave out. My grandson had to take me home. I didn't vote for the first time in 50 years. Crockett recorded the interview. She documented the polling place location. She obtained county commission records showing the decisions to move the polling place. And she found something crucial: emails between county commissioners discussing how the move would reduce turnout in problematic areas. Armed with this evidence, Crockett held a press conference in Pemberton's town square. Local news covered it, then regional news. Then national news picked it up because it was Jasmine Crockett, the Congresswoman who had become synonymous with fighting voter suppression. "Pemberton is not unique," Crockett told the cameras. "There are hundreds of Pembertons across this country, small towns where local officials think nobody's watching. Well, I'm watching, we're all watching, and we're going to fight for every single one." Within 2 weeks, the Department of Justice announced an investigation into voting access in Pemberton and 47 other similar communities. Within a month, a federal judge ordered Pemberton to restore its original polling place and add 2 additional locations. On Election Day 2024, Dorothy Washington voted. She waited only 15 minutes. When she emerged from the polling place, she was crying again, but this time from joy. Congresswoman Crockett kept her promise. "Mrs. Washington told a local reporter. "She didn't forget about us." That story, multiplied across dozens of communities, was the real legacy of that hearing moment. It wasn't just about going viral or embarrassing a senator. It was about tangible change in people's lives. Universities began teaching Crockett's testimony in political science and law school classes as an example of effective advocacy. The transcript was cited in 14 different federal court cases challenging voter suppression. Voting rights organizations used clips from the hearing in their training materials for volunteers. A year after the hearing, the Brennan Center for Justice published a comprehensive study on voting access in America. They found that while challenges remained, there had been measurable improvements in several key areas. 89 polling places that had been closed were reopened. 12 states passed laws reducing wait times at polls, NDNS. voter registration increased by 8% among young voters and 11% among voters of color. Litigation, challenging voter suppression laws, was more successful, winning 67% of cases compared to 43% in previous years. The study's conclusion credited multiple factors, but noted Representative Crockett's testimony provided a clear framework for understanding how voter suppression operates, making it harder for courts to accept claims that restrictive voting laws are race-neutral. But perhaps the most touching moment came at a Democratic fundraising dinner in Dallas, where Crockett was being honored for her work. An elderly black woman approached her at the reception. She was dressed elegantly, carrying herself with quiet dignity. She introduced herself as Margaret Lewis, though that name meant nothing to Crockett at first. "Congresswoman," Mrs. Lewis said softly, "I need to tell you something. In your testimony, you talked about your grandmother walking 3 miles to vote. That was my story too." She pulled out an old photograph from her purse, showing a young woman standing outside a polling place in 1965. "That's me on my first voting day. I was 21 years old. I'd waited my whole life for that moment. And when you told your grandmother's story in that hearing, I felt seen. For the first time in years, I felt like someone in power actually understood what it cost us to get here." Mrs. Lewis's eyes filled with tears. "So I want to thank you, not just for fighting for voting rights now, but for honoring those of us who fought before. We passed the torch to you, and you're carrying it well." Crockett embraced Mrs. Lewis, both women crying now. No cameras captured this moment. It was private, personal. But it reminded Crockett why she did this work. It wasn't about viral videos or political stardom. It was about honoring the people who came before and protecting the rights they fought to secure. As the 2024 election approached, Crockett's influence continued to grow. She became one of the most requested surrogates for Democratic candidates, particularly in competitive districts. Her message was simple but powerful. They tried to silence your voice. We're making sure you're heard. Exit polls from the 2024 election showed that voting rights was a top-tier issue for 68% of Democratic voters and 41% of independent voters. In close races, that issue focus made the difference. More importantly, voter turnout reached historic levels. Despite all the restrictions Republicans had passed, voters showed up in record numbers. Young voters, old voters, black voters, Latino voters, Asian American voters. They waited in long lines, they brought their own water, they refused to be suppressed. And when asked why they voted, many cited a common refrain: because they tried to stop us.